Welcome to tonight's special CT 169 Strong webinar recorded live on November 10th, 2025, just days before the Connecticut General Assembly's SNAP special session. This isn't just another meeting. What's on the table could reshape the future of every town and city in Connecticut. What's in the new revised housing bill? We begin with Alexis Harrison, co-founder of CT 169 Strong. She's long been a voice for transparency, local input, and policy grounded in data, not ideology. She's joined by two CT 169 Strong, powerful local control advocates. Maria Weingarten from New Canaan's Board of Finance and Affordable Housing Committee, known for her sharp fiscal insights and deep understanding of community impacts. And Catherine Braun, land use attorney, fellow Fairfield PZC commissioner and CT 169 Strong's go-to expert on legal language and loopholes. They are joined by guest panelist State Representative Tina Korpus, who represents Stamford and Greenwich. A new voice in Hartford, she brings a seasoned perspective, shaped by both legislative insight and a genuine concern for her district. Together, they'll unpack the new, modestly watered-down housing bill, what's really changed since the governor's veto of HB 5002, and what hasn't. This recording was made for residents who couldn't join us live, but who care deeply about where we're headed next, or to share this information with concerned friends and family. Whether you're from a small town or a growing suburb, what happens this week will affect you. Let's dive in.
Great. Hi, good evening, everybody. Alexis Harrison. I'm with CT 169 Strong. We're a grassroots organization focused on educating the public on zoning and housing bills. As I think most of you are aware, there's an upcoming legislative session, special session happening this week, starting off on Wednesday. Obviously, the government will be addressing the funding issues with SNAP and other federal cuts. And they're also going to be advancing a very significant housing piece of legislation. As you're aware, Governor Lamont did veto a bill last June, a housing bill that had significant problems. But this Friday, it was announced by the majority party and housing advocates and the governor that they would be putting forth another housing bill for the special session. And that is titled LCO 10901, version 3. It was released to the public late Friday, and it's a 99-page bill. It's very complicated, and we've been going through it. It has some good parts, but also has some really bad parts. So we're going to spend some time dissecting it and talking to experts on this. So tonight we have State Rep Tina Korpus, who is from the 149th District in Greenwich and Stamford. We have Catherine Braun, a P&Z commissioner in Fairfield and a lawyer. And we also have Maria Weingarten, co-founder of CT 169 Strong, member of the Board of Finance in New Canaan, as well as the Affordable Housing Committee in New Canaan. It's great to see so many people, a lot of interest on this topic. I know we have other state reps on the call, State Rep Callahan, State Rep Dubitsky, State Rep Haynes. I'm sure I'm missing others, but I'm glad that you're here so we can educate you as well on the bill and we can all have a conversation. So Tina, State Rep Korpus, I'm going to go to you first, if you don't mind. Can you describe what's in the bill at a high level?
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you for having me, Connecticut 169 Strong. So as Alexis described, we are considering this bill on Wednesday in the special session. I will do a very top of the waves review. Instead of a death march of section by section, it is 99 pages. I'm going to hit the high conceptual points of what was in the bill last time and what is in it this time. So let's start with fair share. As people know, fair share before, what was in this bill before, was essentially a study which assigned each town in Connecticut a fair share of affordable housing. And that was actually a number, and each town had a number by its name, and towns had to come up with a plan to meet that number, or they would be deprioritized in certain important parts of state funding, including clean water and other infrastructure grants. That was the bill that was vetoed, and fair share is tagged as one of the most objectionable parts of the bill. This bill that we have before us now that we're considering Wednesday is, for all intents and purposes, from my read of it and from our caucus's read of it, is still a fair share bill. It goes about it in a bit of a different way, but it still accomplishes, in effect, the same objective, which is to require each town to meet a certain percentage of affordable housing, um, or suffer the consequences in terms of funding. So what's going on in the new bill? The new bill establishes a two-lane path that a municipality can follow in order to meet its fair share. The first is a regional path, and the second is on its own as a municipality. The regional path is brand new. This this inserts the councils of government, which is a regional organizational structure that Connecticut has, into the process in an effort to bring the decisions from the state level a little bit closer to home. So for my district, which is Greenwich and Stamford, we are part of the Western Connecticut Regional Council of Governments. So that consists of 18 municipal leaders. Our first selectman, Fred Camillo, is on it. Caroline Simmons, the mayor of Stamford, is on it. And they sort of collaborate together. Well, the COGS now are elevated to a point of having actually a role in this housing. So the bill says that the state's going to set a number of fair share housing units per COG, and is going to push those numbers down to the 8 or 9 COGs in the state. And then those COGs are going to get together, and they're going to, along a certain set of criteria, push the numbers out to their 18 members in the case of Western Connecticut, which is where we are. So it's inserting another level in between the state and the municipalities in an effort to make that decision a little bit closer to the people. A state can either accept its municipal plan as given to it by the COGs, or if it doesn't want to pursue that plan, it can go it alone and develop its own municipal plan to accomplish a certain amount of affordable units. Regardless of which one of those two paths a town chooses to go down, each one of the regional housing or the municipal housing plan has to be approved by OPM. If it's not approved by OPM, which is the Office of Personnel Management at the state level, within 90 days, it goes to a Fair Housing Council, which is established by this bill. The time frame for all of this is that the COGs get their numbers from the state once every 10 years. Each municipality has to make its plan to last for 5 years and has to file that plan every 5 years and then update on the progress of the plan every year. What happens if you don't comply? Are you still subject to getting deprioritized for funding? The bill handles that topic in a little bit of a different way. Instead of saying you get deprioritized for funding, it's silent about that, but it establishes 3 new buckets of funding and basically says that the municipalities eligible for those buckets of funding are those which have met the requirements of their plan. So what does all of this mean, and is it better or worse than the fair share provision we had before? Everyone is still getting a fair share. What was true about the prior bill that was vetoed that's not true about this one is, at least it was honest about what number you were getting. Every legislator had to take a vote with a number next to his or her town's name. They got a lot of flack about saying, yes, I agree that my town has to build X number of units. And the problem with this bill is we don't have any of those numbers. Those numbers are going to be developed by OPM, and they are still going to apply on a regional basis or on a town basis, but we don't have the numbers to vote on. So that's one difference that I think is a negative. The second is the argument that the COGs being involved is pushing the decision-making closer to the people. Maybe that's true, but looking at my COG, Western Connecticut Council of Governments, there are 18 different towns in there. Danbury, Greenwich, Stamford, those are very different towns. So it still has a one-size-fits-all vibe, or it still has a one-size-fits-all philosophy behind the bill. It's just now we're talking about 18 municipalities instead of 169. One thing that really troubles me, the third thing about this, is that the COGs, when they are deciding which of their 18 municipalities get what percentages, they are required to make a higher percentage on those towns with a higher grand list. So for Greenwich and Stamford, that means the COGs are going to give us a higher percentage than we otherwise would have simply because of our grand list. And I don't see the nexus between that and the goals of this bill. The fourth thing that's something to note about this new proposal on fair share is that All of the plans are submitted to the Office of Personnel Management. If 90 days go by and the OPM does not approve a municipality or a municipality plan or a regional plan, automatically that regional or municipality plan goes to a new council established by this bill. And that council is comprised of legislators, political people, and administrators in the executive committee level. Those people are not experts in real estate or housing development. So it's odd to me that these decisions would be punted to that new council. Fifth, funding. So we have not said in this bill does not say that it will deprioritize funding for those municipalities which do not meet their housing plan. However, the three new buckets of funding, which are available to municipalities which meet their fair share standard, it doesn't say how much money is in those plans. There's no fiscal note right now, to my knowledge, about this bill. So we really don't know what that looks like. And even if you're not deprioritized for steep grants or other things we have right now, what is going to happen to those? Does that mean all the money right now to encourage towns to develop affordable housing is going to go into these new funds? And how much is going to go into these new funds? That's a mystery, which I think is very important to know and is not stated in the bill. And finally, all of the problems which existed in this bill before are still there. I don't want to me, this bill went from an F minus to an F as it currently stands. So on the fair share piece of it, that's where we are. I'll try to go that's the biggest one. I'll try to go a little bit more quickly through the other big topics in housing that this new bill contains. The bill contains something called priority housing development zones. These are completely voluntary. And they basically say that municipalities can establish such a zone, allowing as of right developments for multifamily housing. And if you do this, you get points towards a housing moratorium. This is purely a carrot. I don't think it's that bad, frankly. It worries me because it potentially leads us towards something that is not an opt-in. But as it stands, as drafted, this is not a particularly objectionable part of this bill. That's priority housing development zones, and that's an initiative from the governor. The third big topic area in this bill is work, live, ride. This is transit-oriented development zones. And it used to say that a town which opted into this framework and chose to create a transit-oriented development zone in their town or city was basically opting into as-of-right development around a certain perimeter of those transit hubs, essentially to create an environment in which people can rely on mass transit. They don't have to have a car. It decongests the car situation in Connecticut, and it allows low-income housing close to places where people can get to and from work and live. That's in this bill too. One change, however, is that if you opt into a TOD under the new bill, one change that makes it a little bit better is that if a new housing development built is over 10 units, the first floor thereof can be used for commercial development. This is on the theory that what happens to your commercial downtown if all of a sudden all these residential are getting built? And the fix to that in part is you can have the first floor as a commercial development. That's the third big topic in this bill, work, live, ride, and it is still there. I've already discussed the Council on Housing Development, which is now empowered with legislators and people in the executive branch to approve housing plans, either at the municipal level or the regional level. Again, that is a body without the housing expertise, and I think it's very odd that it's empowered in that way. That's number 4. Number 5, commercial to residential development. So the bill used to say that 5002 said that developers now have as of right ability, that is bypassing local zoning, except in the case of safety or health, to convert commercial properties to residential properties, provided that those residential properties meet certain criteria. And this is actually very problematic because it blurs a line of a very fundamental distinction in real estate law of the difference between a commercial development and a residential development. They have very different requirements as far as sewage. They have very different feelings as far as what you want to go on there. There's safety issues, there's human issues in the residential, et cetera. This was a problematic part of the first bill. This has been changed and watered down a little bit, but it is the position of our caucus that the watering down really takes you to the same place. So what does the new bill do? The new bill says this still exists, but not technically as of right. If a developer comes in and wants to take an abandoned office building and make it into residential units, they can't purely do that as of right, but they can do it. But now that can happen as essentially a summary judgment on the basis, a summary judgment on the part of the zoning authority in a town. So what does that mean? That means that towns are not permitted to have public hearings on those applications. Towns are not permitted to do any special permitting. Towns are not permitted to go through the process of zoning variances. The only thing that is required of the application of the builder is that public safety and health are taken into account. So it's still a very streamlined and omitting of the public's input process for converting commercial to real estate to residential development. So this is a little bit better, but still onerous. And frankly, this one doesn't have the long time fuse that Fair Share has. This one is not like a 5-year process. This would go into effect in 2026. And I think this one has a real ability to recast the landscape of what our Connecticut towns look like.
If I can stop you, and thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. So I know it's a lot to unpack, and you only got this bill late Friday, so I appreciate all this. What about the community's affordable housing plans, develop POCDs, plan of conservations and developments? Where do they fall into this? It seems like a massive bureaucracy, layers of layers, but where do those fall? Because a lot of towns spend a great deal of time and even money planning for their future with these documents.
It's an excellent question, and I really have this issue in my district because Stamford just came out with a 2035 plan, which is unique to it. Greenwich has its own plan. They're both part of the same cog, and now they are given the same number, and now the cog's job is to allocate essentially a fair share among its participants. So the answer to your question is the bill is silent about that. And this was an issue we had in 5002 and is still an issue in this bill. That is, you have numerous different housing infrastructures superimposed upon each other without any clear guideline of how they all fit together. You've got 830G, you've got fair share, you've got work, live, ride, you've got the parking requirements, you have the commercial to residential, you have the town plans, and it's sort of a jump ball. You know, figure it out and figure out how all of these pieces work together.
Wow.
And
Thank
I
you.
would just add,
Yeah, and go
just
ahead.
real
And Maria, I'd
quick,
also like to also ask you too, if you don't mind too, how are planning departments going to handle all this? Some towns have, a part-time planner. Some towns have, 2 or 3 maybe, but they're already probably doing their day-to-day job. So, Maria, how would you expect towns to really execute this?
well, I think it's going to be challenging because I think at the outset, I think the governor originally said we want towns to take the lead, and just to take a step back. I mean, when we thought about towns taking the lead, the thought was that there would be an opportunity for towns to really provide all that information. What we were saying was that there isn't enough data, right? That had come through 5002 was a pie in the sky. It was a top-down approach, and we didn't really have all of those data points from a local level to really be able to mesh that together to say what makes sense. And unfortunately, that's where we are yet again, because you have this top-down number that the state is going to set, and it's based on the amount of housing, housing cost burden, which is what the developer advocates always seem to hang their hat on. And then the question to me, the biggest question is, what happens when a town decides, okay, let's say everybody in Westcog, right? All 19 of the municipalities in Westcog decide that each of them are going to come up with their own numbers. what's the sum of their numbers? And if it doesn't equal what was set up by the state as a grand number for the state, and then divided by the 9 different regions, the councils of government, the 9 planning regions, what happens when those numbers don't add up? And how are you going to reconcile that? How is the state, how are our towns going to have to deal with that? Because the reality is, if this is your first time out of the gate, why aren't we starting from a bottom up and understanding where we are with a lack of infrastructure in different municipalities, what actually can be done? And why aren't we starting with that as a point of knowing all of the things we have to know, so that a town can start doing planning and be strategic about what it needs, how it has to apply to things. And that's not what we have here. We have still a number that's kind of pulled out of the sky based on arbitrary considerations, and then COGS are going to have to try to plug that number. And no one, and I've talked about this with a number of different legislators, and nobody has an answer for that question.
Yeah, I just think about, I'm in MetroCog, and we have the largest city in the state, which is Bridgeport, and we also have Easton, Connecticut, which is a small rural town, a watershed town that provides water to most of greater Fairfield County. So, basically a tale of two cities, if you will. So I'm curious how that will pan out for my cog. Maria, or maybe this is better for Tina, this was kind of fashioned as a very bipartisan bill after weeks of negotiating. Is that true?
Absolutely not. I mean, our ranking member on the Housing Committee, on the Planning Development Committee, Tony Scott and Joe Zullo had several conversations, but very late in the game, and were not invited to have input on what the bill would contain. It was more told what the bill would contain. And I think that is really a very problematic feature of single party governments in any state, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. And the problem of a supermajority. When you have enough votes to pass anything, including allowing certain people in your party to vote no, you still have the votes to pass it. You really lose incentive. And again, this would be true regardless of who held the supermajority, to incorporate other points of view. I think the COGS were used as a proxy for incorporating first selectman and mayor's input, but I have talked to one of my mayor or first selectman, and he was not consulted at all. So I think the process has been enormously problematic.
And with a special session, there'll be no public vetting, no public hearings. It's here you go vote on it. There's probably not much, right? Not much discussion, as you would see during a normal session.
No, we are called in for one day, and this is not the only thing we'll be considering. So a lot of some of the pushback on that point has been that a lot of these concepts have been heard in public hearing, and it is true they have, but there are a couple of sections of the bill. Well, there's one in particular that has not been vetted at all, and appears here and will be passed along with the rest of it if it's passed on Wednesday.
So the Council of Housing Development, I'm not sure that was ever premeditated either, right? And then another part that wasn't premeditated, or what else is interesting, is the parking. We haven't really talked about the parking, but that as a statewide policy does not exist anywhere in the United States.
Can you describe that, Maria, just for people who don't know?
Sure. So it says that you can require no minimum parking requirement for any development that's under 16 units. And they've tried to soften it. And again, this is a compromise. They're calling this a compromise, but a compromise doesn't mean it's good policy. And I think everybody has to understand that just because you're compromising a number on here doesn't make it workable, right? For statewide. And so one of the things that they've softened, they say, is that 4% of your municipality can be specifically excluded from that as of right, and the ability to have no parking. So you would have to draw your little map, and it can only be 4%. Now, maybe that works really well if you're a rural community and you're mostly rural, but you have just one little downtown area, and that works for you, right? So you can easily draw your little circle around your downtown area if that's a concern, that you have no parking allowed in that area, and you're on a state road and your downtown is in a state road. But if you're a suburban community where you have narrow roads, and there's plenty of those in our state where, you know, we were developed as a lot of these towns were developed as small factory towns or small, you know, where they don't have on-street parking available, where the road is too narrow, where all you have are two lanes that pass each other. That's not a road where you can have on-street parking. So if you have development and there's no requirement for parking, and you have no access to sidewalks and no access to parking lots or anything, those costs are now going to have to be absorbed by your municipality. And what do? They increase their taxes to create parking lots that have not been, and again, this is just a subsidy. This just helps subsidize parking for developers. It's just a developer handout. So this is not good policy. It's just not statewide. It does not exist anywhere in the United States. So we should not be an early adapter for this policy at all.
Thank you. I do want to jump to Kathy Braun, who's on the line. I know that she had to take this from her car because of traffic. But I do want you to talk about the environmental impact of this bill. That really hasn't been talked about that much. You're an environmentalist. You've done a lot of wetlands cases in your career. So I'd love to hear what your perspective is and what you've uncovered as you read the bill. And you're on mute.
This thing about as of right versus summary review, I see that as a distinction without a difference. I don't see them as being much different. I think it means the zoning commission has their hands tied behind their backs and no ability to really put any conditions of approval on a project.
You want to define as of right and the summary review?
Yeah, no public hearing. Commission has no discretion. Right now, if you go to zoning, if you're an applicant, we can have a regulation that says, even though it seems to comply with our regulations, we can still require a special permit or a special exception, meaning we can decide based on a site-specific and project-specific review on what the local conditions are right there. And this is where neighbors come into play because they know what the local conditions are. They live it every day. We can put conditions of approval on it. If you just have, here's your checklist and your cookie cutter checklist, and it checks all the boxes, it will be approved under either scenario. So I don't really see much difference. And that creates an environmental issue. Also, if there are no public hearings, and I'm unclear on whether public hearings would be allowed or not, but if there are no public hearings, that creates an environmental issue. Because in a public hearing process, you could file an environmental intervention. If there's no public hearing, I don't see how you can file an environmental intervention under 22A-19, the Environmental Protection Act of Connecticut, and also to protect historic resources as well. So that would be not allowed to be done because you wouldn't have a hearing to intervene into. So that's a big issue for me. But also not being able to do a site-specific, project-specific review, the commission won't hear things about, well, this is a piece of open space that should be preserved. And that gets me to another issue I have, which is something they're defining as developable land. They're defining developable land as land that could be developed. I believe it would be government-owned or state-owned, but part of the act says take an inventory of all this land. If it's developable, then it will be prone to all of these housing accelerator projects that are in this bill. But what they're not doing is carving out parts of land that should be carved out. For example, open space that's not already protected by a conservation easement or a land trust or a Parks and Rec public use. If it's not already protected, it won't be protected. And it's not carved out of this act. So if you have little pieces of land that are not considered ecologically significant, but they should be protected, like in Fairfield, the whole Rooster River watershed is subject to flooding. It's got overdevelopment. There's little pieces of green space that should be protected. That would not be protected under this bill. And you're just going to have.
I'm sure the environmental groups will call that out, right?
I don't know. I mean, the devil's in the details. If you're not going to wade through this 99-page bill and really analyze it, I don't know. There's a lot of sort of conflicting provisions in this bill. There's also so many programs, it's really hard to see what affects each one. I also have another concern, and it's not really environmental, but it's 8-30G, and maybe one of the people who have read it more in depth than me can explain this. It seems to me as though 8-30G might be being weaponized in this bill. In other words, you will lose your points to get a moratorium if you don't comply with certain other initiatives in the bill. I'd like for someone to address that. because 8-30G does create environmental harm because it ties the zoning commission's hands to do good review of projects. But it also creates a huge upheaval in neighborhoods because it incentivizes developers to put massive projects in a small, modest neighborhood in order to make up for the 30% affordable units with market rate units. And it's a huge problem. And towns get out from under it temporarily by qualifying with points for a 4-year moratorium. It seems to me I've seen provisions of this bill which take that away if you don't do other things that the bill wants you to do. And to me, that's, instead of reforming 8-30G, which most people want, it seems like it's putting it on steroids. So I have environmental concerns, but also 8-30G concerns.
I would just add a couple of things there. So really your response to summary review as a town could be that you create more form-based code. And that's sort of what exists in a large city like New York, let's say, and in a lot of other places as well. And the philosophy is that if you have form-based code, it gives developers a more clear path to understand what is and what is not permitted. So it takes a little bit of the risk out of a special permit process. However, what's being overlooked is that it also can make things more complicated. So towns that can afford to will then create form-based code, to try to have to think about every hypothetical situation that can occur in a development scenario. And then sometimes when you have that much more technical information, you actually need more technical experts to help you weed through the new code base, right? If towns don't have the funding to do that, they're going to leave themselves exposed to a lot of potential developers who might take advantage of this new bill in this way and just go ahead and go build whatever they want wherever they want it. And as we know, land is finite, and once it's changed, it's altered forever. So these are real concerns that people should have about this. So I'll leave it at that.
Now, you all talked about how this is in many ways a retread of 5002, which the governor vetoed last June. What other aspects are there that are objectionable to you? You talked about the fair share that isn't being called fair share, the summary review, the parking issues, but what else is in there that we should know about?
I would add in, as was mentioned about that council, hold on, I'm trying to find the exact name of it again. The Council on Housing Development. It's a little bit ironic to us that there are so many different areas where it tells you the exact deadline, like you have to do this within 30 days, within 120 days. You have to do all of these things within a certain defined timeline. But it's interesting that OPM, which is setting an overall number as to what your affordable housing, is going to be, what all these like targets are going to be from a statewide level, and then pushing a arbitrary number down to COGS, then they can decide to just sit on their hands and not approve your plan. So you can be trying to be an honest actor here and putting out a plan and trying to do it within a time frame, and they can punt on it by not responding within 120 days. And then it goes to this Council of Housing Development, and then the housing development is silent on as to when they don't have a deadline to respond. So I don't see a deadline in here for them to make a decision on whether you have a viable plan or not. And the reason this is important is if you don't have a plan that's been approved by the state, if you're interested in getting a moratorium, you cannot. You cannot get any future moratoriums if you're not approved yet. So you can see where this could be a bit of a gaming the system, where maybe they're trying to help a friend who's a developer, and you have a community who's trying to do the right thing and was in a moratorium, is trying to get another moratorium or whatever. And they may stall this process just to allow someone to step in, because once somebody is submitted an 830G, you have to play that through even if you get a moratorium.
For example, yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kathy. Go ahead.
I was just saying, for example, in Fairfield, we qualified for a moratorium on April 1st this year, but it took 100 days for the state to qualify us to basically review the deeds and make sure we had certificates of occupancy for that many built affordable units to qualify for a moratorium. During the 100 days, we had a surge of new HH30Gs, which basically simply just front loaded the amount we would have gotten anyway for the next 4 years of the moratorium. So I
Right.
could see that happening. Absolutely. It's already happened to us.
Mhm.
I was just gonna say, you know, a lot of folks have been calling for reforms to 830G. I know, Tina, you've talked about this as part of your platform when you ran, and I think we're seeing it's very obvious the math issues with 830G and really, you know, obtaining that 10%. So where does any reform go with 830G?
Two responses to that. The bill does have a study. The bill does not alter 830G to the better in any way. It does have a study which is provided for in the bill, which asks that to study the viability of, instead of measuring the criteria for a moratorium in the terms of a percentage, it would measure the criteria for a moratorium in terms of an actual number. So that is, in order to achieve a moratorium, towns have to demonstrate that they've reached a certain percentage or improved by a certain percentage. But as we all know in 830G, the percentage is problematic because every time you add housing units, you add to the numerator and also add to the denominator. This bill provides for a study to convert that into a fixed number. There are pluses and minuses to that. The problem I have with a fixed number is that at least a percentage is fair and everyone is treated the same way. Once you start getting into fixed numbers, there's a way to penalize certain towns over other towns. But one thing to your prior question, Alexis, which I wanted to raise, which we haven't talked about, is everything in this bill, or most, as far as I can read, everything in this bill has at least been subject to a public hearing and has at least been vetted by the public. The Housing Committee, the P&D Committee, the legislature, debated on the floor, et cetera. One of the last provisions of this new bill, Section 47, is something that, according to our researchers who I talked to today, is brand new, has never been vetted by the public, and is potentially a loophole that is quite large. And that is Section 47, which gives the authority to the Department of Housing to develop any property on state land, to develop housing projects on state land, and to then, subject to zoning authority, but again, the state could use 830G. Once it's developed a housing program or a 10-story development, it has no limitation on the size of the development. The state is required to offer that property to the town to be purchased. Towns are not able to come up with millions of dollars on the fly to purchase a unit like this. If the town refuses, then the housing authority of the state is required to offer it on a preferential basis to a nonprofit. This is a very bizarre provision. Number one, it hasn't been vetted at all, and it's very much circumventing the democratic process. And number two, it is potentially an enormous vesting of power in the executive branch in the Department of Housing to do things which could result in sort of all kinds of development. It's almost like if the 46 sections above this don't work, we've got this as a back door to build affordable housing on the heads of those towns which have not met the requirements set forth in the rest of the bill. So I just wanted to highlight Section 47, which I think should be kicked out, not even on the merits, but just on the basis of process.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I do want to go to some questions from the audience. And this is a really good point that we really haven't touched on yet. Are there any sewage management studies that have been made available that could talk to or show some of the limitations to development? He cites Easton, as I talked about before, and Trumbull. They cannot build enough sewage treatment plants since there's no suitable water bodies to discharge the facility into. So is there any provisions about sewage or limitations?
There is a study going on, and there is a loan program within the bill to allow for expansion of sewer lines. But again, I think the idea here is that we should be working with the municipalities first to figure out what our capacity is and prioritize where it makes sense. It seems like there's been a lot of disinvestment within the cities and that's where you have infrastructure. It's where most of the state funding goes from all residents, right? Any of the state revenues tend to head right to the cities. So if you're going to have that stuff, we should really invest in the cities in a way that's going to make everything vibrant. Because that's where you have transit. That's where you have the most access to transit and opportunities for density development, because the infrastructure already exists, rather than starting from scratch in areas of the state that have no infrastructure, that where people are car dependent. And you can wish that people are less car dependent, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And that you can afford, it's going to be very costly in those other areas to do such things. So I don't have a really good answer on the sewer, quite frankly. I don't know that there's been a study that's been done that's very much outlined where we are with sewers, but these are some of the issues that we're facing right now in this bill.
There is a provision, I believe, and when I was reading it this weekend, that maybe the bill would give grant money to a town to improve their infrastructure, including sewer.
But again, the devil's in the details, because everybody knows that there isn't an unlimited source of funding for anyone. So I think it's important to prioritize. It's important to really look at what makes sense, and just the idea that you can just push all of these different things onto municipalities is concerning without having all of that information. Section 32 does talk about a statewide wastewater capacity study. And we know that there's a working group right now that I'm not sure if that was passed in prior legislation or not, but there's a working group that's already in process that's looking at some of recommendations on wastewater management.
Got it. Thank you. Kathy, anything you want to add
Yeah.
on that part?
Not, well, I didn't see anything in this bill about communal septic, but I know there will be coming up in the next legislative session. But, this bill should have been brought up just 2 months later in the legislative session. There's going to be other bills that could impact this, conflict with this, and it should not be done now. There's parts that have never been explored at all. And even though it's claimed to be moderately watered down from what was rejected last year, nevertheless, it's a very large, complex bill that will basically, in my opinion, put a massive unfunded mandate on towns to try to comply with this. We spent almost $200,000. Luckily, we got ARPA funds. That was the pandemic funds to hire a consultant to help draft our 10-year plan of conservation and development. Towns are going to have to hire consultants right and left to just comply with the reporting requirements alone.
Yeah, I do want to let Mr. Sam Romeo is on, and he runs the Greenwich Communities, which is affordable housing in Greenwich. So I'm going to let him ask a question. Oh, let me unmute you.
Hello.
Mr. Romeo?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on the panel. Please ask your question.
Yeah. The question I have is you brought up the sewage, but it's not just sewage. If there's money even available to extend the sewer lines, it doesn't tell you what the capacity is that the municipality can handle right now. So the sewer plant would probably have to be enlarged anyway. But along with the just sewer, it's the rest of the infrastructure: water, police, fire, schools, cars. It's the entire infrastructure of every municipality that'll be taking a hit with all this new development. And even right down to waste management. I mean, the waste management problem, it could be tremendous, because the state eventually is going to have to get involved in all of this garbage that's coming from all the municipalities. And what do you do with it? So this bill is so far out of the way that it's got to be postponed. It's got to be looked at. And Tina, I just sent you an email too, talking about what I would like to see happen. I would like to see the governor put together a special committee made up of housing commissioners, the commissioners who know what they need to get the job done. But we're the experts in creating housing. Legislators, yeah, they're fine at doing law and all that, but we know what we need to get the job done. And if the governor would sit us down in the room and say, okay, guys, tell us how to accomplish the goal we want to set, we can do it. And
Yeah,
I think
thank
that's
you.
the way to go.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for all the great work that you do in Greenwich. Okay. Let me go back to some of the questions. I'm going to give this one to Catherine because it's a legal issue. Does the new bill address liability for legal costs incurred in a challenge to a denial? Presumably that's 830G denial.
I don't know. I have not seen that in the bill. I know something was taken out about, I think it was removed where a town could be penalized for acting, quote, in bad faith. I don't know if that's what the question is asking about specifically. The old bill said that a town could be penalized if a judge determined that they denied something in bad faith. But I don't know if the new bill, it doesn't reform 830G at all. I know that much. So, but I have other concerns about it. Like, I do believe somewhere in this bill, and maybe Tina knows, it's using 8-30G against you by reducing the amount of points you can get for a moratorium if you don't do something else you're supposed to do. For instance, have an acceptable, or if you get rejected, if you don't have an acceptable plan for housing growth. Maybe Tina is aware of that. That would be terrible. I believe I saw that in the bill.
Yes, that's in the bill.
Yeah.
And also some towns, if they create the opportunity for development, that's part of the governor's part of this was the incentive housing zones. The problem is they said if development doesn't happen within a year, it can be taken away. You know, and I think again, this is sort of where are the true incentives? I mean, what we see are tightening up the ability for, you know, or limiting, I should say, the ability to get a moratorium. They've been very active and very vocal on that in this bill. But it just, again, what seems to be lost, and even in the majority leaders roundtable recently, what was lost in this was there was outrage that Orange, you know, had the ability to get a moratorium because they just added up their HUE points and they got a moratorium, and they seem to, and they have enough to potentially get a second one. And again, the reason you get HUE points is because you've had development happening. So if that's what's happened, then you should get credit for that, and you should be able to get to a moratorium. We should be giving them, you know, praise for that, not sort of vilifying towns who are actually trying to make affordable housing happen within the state. So this is where I feel we're sort of upside down on a lot of these things, and we find ways to vilify municipalities instead of being an ally and a partner, and instead of, you know, if we were really taking a lead where towns were allowed to take a lead, we would be a partner. The state would be a partner with us. They wouldn't be trying to take away points and limit ability for towns to engage with the state and work toward good solutions and really do good, strong strategic planning that moves our state forward. That's what we all want. We all want a vibrant economy. We want a state that thrives. But if we're not addressing the economic realities that have been imposed on our state by our legislators, no offense to Tina, who's on here as well, but you know, if you have energy policy that's made us the third most expensive in the country, if you have unfunded mandates that are pushed down onto municipalities that have made our local property taxes, because that's how you address unfunded mandates in municipalities, you have to raise the money and address a thing that the state is mandating on you. If you've raised our local property taxes, so we're third highest in the nation in local property taxes, those are all issues that it doesn't matter how much you zone for housing, it won't really help improve affordability. The only thing that improves affordability is bringing a vibrant economy back, to have jobs come to our state that brings better paying jobs. That is how you improve affordability, is better paying jobs. And
Yeah,
that's
I do want to, I know we only have a few minutes left. Maria, I don't want to cut you off. I hate cutting you off, but
nope, it's all good.
Just on I have a few questions here. One question, Tina, this is probably more suited for you. Do we expect the bill to be voted through and signed into law? Are legislators expected to vote on it the same day as the special session itself?
Unfortunately, yes. The special session will be one day. And I checked in as recently as about an hour before this call whether there was any chance that this didn't get called. And from what we know in the minority, there's very little chance at this point that it's not called. And the bill would not be brought out again unless it was essentially already baked, unless the deal had been struck on the majority side between the legislature and the governor, that we have the votes to pass this. The governor is signing it into law, and it's pretty much a fait accompli. I hate to say that, but it is true. And I do think there will still be members of the majority that vote no on it. But again, the numbers being what they are, they can afford to take a political vote and vote no on this bill, still knowing it will pass. And that's where we are.
Yeah.
And I will add, to add insult to injury, it's interesting that the state numbers for how much of the overall state need of housing, guess when they're due? They're due on December 1st, 2026, which is after the election in November of 2026 that reelects the legislature and the governors. So again, it's all very intentional, and done in a way where nothing that's going to potentially impact anybody from losing seats for having voted for something, because down the road we're not going to see what those true numbers are until December 1st is the deadline.
Thank you. This is more of a foundational question. I should have asked this earlier. We hear the term housing crisis. We hear the term we need X amount of units. I look around my town of Fairfield. We have a lot of housing development happening thanks to the good work of our Planning and Zoning Commission and some, great developers. But what is the need? What is the actual need? I'm just curious, what do we need?
I mean, I can hit that a little bit. So one of the things we know is that the tightest part of the real estate market here in Connecticut is single family homes. It's not rental homes, it's single family homes. So that is a concern, because when you look at these bills that are focused on multifamily, and most of this will be rentals development, you're not getting to home ownership. And that's really the goal for most is to be able to create generational wealth, to have a place, a home for your family. And that's really one of the concerns with this, is that it's developer handouts and it's really not solving for what's needed. Is it a housing crisis? We say it's an affordability crisis. And that's really the issue. And as I mentioned already about energy costs and taxes and all those other things, getting good jobs in our state and having a viable economy. And the issue is that if you're if you're Fairfield County and you're close to New York, there's a large job market in New York that you can take advantage of. That's not necessarily true in the entire state. So we need corporations, larger companies coming into our state, and that's what hasn't been happening. And that's why our population's been stagnant in most of the state, but for truly Fairfield County, which had anemic anyway. It's about a 5% growth rate in recent years.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Kathy, a question
Yeah.
about SEPA. I know this is right up your alley. Can we issue SEPA based on intervenor petitions prior to this bill? So is there anything going to be impacted with environmental protection?
Well, if this bill passes and if it eliminates public hearings, you will not be able to use the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act to file an environmental intervention under the law 22A-19 to raise environmental or historic preservation issues, because you have to have an administrative proceeding to intervene into. And so if you don't have a proceeding, you can't intervene. So whenever it goes into effect that we don't have public hearings, I don't believe you can use it. There's also another one that hasn't come up in this conversation, just the protest petitions. When they want to do a zone change to allow higher development in your zone, right now, 20% of the neighbors can file a petition, and it forces the supermajority on zoning to change the zone. That's being eliminated. They're bringing it up to 50% of the neighbors have to do it, which is hard to do, but also they're getting rid of the supermajority, so I don't even see the point. So that's a part of our zoning law that's been around since like 1959, because people in close proximity to development should get special care because that's where the impact takes place. So that's another thing that's happening that's bad. Many things are bad in this bill.
Right. Another question, and I know we're getting tight on time here. What exactly is a newly formed council on housing development, and how accountable are they to the voters?
That's a good question because we're not going to know who's on there. There are a number of people who can be appointed to that committee, and we don't know. They could start acting like a siting council. They could be filled with developer advocates by all of the appointments that can be made by members of the legislature from the majority party. So it is really a lopsided group, and they don't seem to have a lot of technical expertise related to housing, yet they are a housing development committee. I don't understand how that works. So it remains to be seen what that is. But again, when you don't even have to approve a plan, when everybody else has deadlines and they're the one group that doesn't, it seems like this is just manipulating
Yeah.
the
Now, this is
process.
from a question from someone who's really read the bill, page 71. Why is an expansion of the Attorney General's rights to bring civil actions against Connecticut citizens part of a housing bill? Yeah, okay.
Good question.
What constitutes as developable land? Kathy, you want to take that?
Okay, yeah, so I have, I mean, you could say any undeveloped land is developable, but what this bill does is it exposes land to all the hyper development initiatives here, mandates, incentives, deprioritization, whatever it is, you're going to have no more open space left. So what they're not carving out, again, I mentioned before, open space that's not already protected. Also, they do carve out inland wetlands. That's under another law. But they're not carving out, I believe, the upland review area, which is the buffer around the wetland, which the commission, the wetlands agency, has regulations which protect, and they have to have public hearings. Now, this bill says you're not allowed to use any ordinance to expand something that could be carved out of here. So a wetlands reg to me is an ordinance. So I don't think the upland review area would be protected under this bill. Also, tidal wetlands are protected, but there is no required buffer around them. And experts have testified to my commission that we need 100 feet to allow the tidal wetlands to migrate landward as they literally get subsumed and drowned as sea level rises. DEP has said sea level is going to rise 20 inches in the next 25 years. So we will lose our tidal wetlands if we don't immediately start protecting a 100-foot buffer everywhere where there's a tidal wetland.
Yeah, thank you. I do have to,
In other
I do
words.
have to close because we only have 3 minutes left and I know people have places to be. So I just want to offer each of you a minute for a closing statement. State Rep Corpus.
Thank you. Just 3 quick things. I said before that this is a fait accompli. No one knows what will happen on Wednesday. We blocked this last time through all of the outpouring of objections from the public. I've gotten a lot of emails from people, but keep the emails coming because it's really not over till it's over. So please continue to put pressure on the governor and your legislators to amend this, to veto it. I don't think that's going to happen, but to fix it as much as possible. We in the minority certainly plan to run amendments that will make it less terrible. The second thing I'll say is that to Sam Romeo's point, nice to hear from you tonight, Sam, is that there is a real opportunity here between the veto and the special session or the real session in February to really come to a grand compromise on housing, to really involve people and to really make good policy. And it's really unfortunate that that enormous opportunity was not taken because unfortunately it really wasn't taken. And third and lastly, I will say we will not give up the fight even if this thing passes. We can always change it, we can always amend it, but this is the problem with a single party state, in my opinion, and this bill is unfortunately a prime example of that. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you, as always. Great to see you. Kathy and Maria, just real quick, just some quick
I think
comments.
we need a similar initiative for open space preservation, which I don't think we have. I think we're being hoodwinked by this. This is coming in 2 months before the legislative session begins. It should go through the normal democratic process. Where are all the environmentalists? They need to be speaking out against this. This is going to eat up open space, and that will affect us because climate change is here. Nature-based solutions, which is a trend in helping to deal with climate change, that requires land. The land will be eaten up.
I would just add this bill really isn't public. I mean, I think we said that at first that this was made public, but the reality is it was handed to legislators and we ended up getting a hold of it. But that doesn't mean that people have seen it. The public has not seen it. The public has not been part of it. And what we have is just a working draft version 3. We don't even have one that's gone through the Office of Legislative Research. We don't have a bill that's gone through a fiscal analysis either. So this is not proper process. Okay. It is now Monday evening. This bill is expected to be called on Wednesday morning in the House and put up for a vote. Wednesday morning, and we are nowhere on seeing a full bill that's fully vetted, that the public has seen. And this was part of the problem the first time. If you don't have people who understand land use and everything else, and who are part of municipalities who understand best what works and doesn't work in legislation, you are missing the point here. We thought that what was happening was that the governor was going to say, okay, let's take the lead. Let's let towns take the lead. This is not towns taking the lead. And everybody
Absolutely.
should be clear on that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you all, Kathy, Maria, Tina. Really great conversation. Thank you all for being here. I know on a rainy Monday night, we will be continuing the conversation. And please go to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, CT169 Strong. It will have up-to-date information as it comes in and as
And
we
sign our
analyze the
petition.
bill. Sign our petition. Please donate to us. We're all volunteers. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Please stay abreast of what is happening with land use legislation in Hartford at ct169strong.org and support our efforts to mobilize grassroots action in support of local control of zoning and land use. And thank you for tuning in.